On the left, we have a list of openings. On the right, we have a list of players. Welcome to a new series. I will be picking one opening and one player and going through the best game that I can find by the player on the right using the opening on the left. First up, I want to look at the Reti opening, or the King's Indian attack. And I'm going to pair this opening up with Vladimir Kramnik. In this video, I want to look at Kramnik's victory against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in the King's Indian attack, which took place during the Gashimov Memorial back in April 2015. But firstly, who are these two players? Firstly, who is Vladimir Kramnik? A quick Google search shows his peak rating was 2817. His current rating is 2753. He retired last year in January after Tata Steel. Kramnik is best known for becoming world champion in 2000, having beaten Garry Kasparov. Who is Maxime Vachier-Lagrave? Currently, he's ranked number 4 in the world. He's from France. Peak rating 2819, and he is 29 years old. Kramnik has white, MVL has black. The game began knight f3, knight f6, g3, d5, bishop g2, c6. Vachier-Lagrave is normally a Grunfeld player, but in 2015 he chose to play d5, c6, castle, bishop g4, d3, knight d7. When you play bishop g4, then the queen's knight to d7, black wants to play e5 in one move, and we'll see why shortly. h3, bishop h5, keeping the pin on this diagonal, and white now plays queen e1. The point of queen e1 is to play e4, threatening e5. That's why, after you play knight from b8 to d7, black doesn't play e6 here, plays e5, to stop white going e5 in the future. After e4, take, releasing the tension, and then bishop c5. Going back to this point, there have been some developments since 2015 in this opening. Instead of taking on e4, black can play bishop d6. I discovered bishop d6 when I was listening to the Greek grandmaster GM Papaioannou. He was commentating on the European Championships and he mentioned this option, and there was a top level game. I will include a link to this video in the top right corner and in the description. After bishop d6, the point is, after e takes d5, you don't play the normal looking move, which is c takes d5, you do knight takes d5. First question you may be asking is, why not c takes d5? Because black's king is still in the middle. So let's play knight takes e5, and after take, d4. And already white is going to win back the piece with a nice position. That's why black plays knight takes d5. It looks a bit strange, but it's okay, it works out. What if you do the same thing, because black's king is still in the middle? Knight takes e5, d4, castle, away. Now after d e5, it looks like white has won a pawn, but black gets nice play with rook e8. And maybe white is in some trouble. White's queenside pieces have not been developed. Black's pieces are all out. This rook is lined up against white's queen, so if white defends the pawn, f4, f6, and white's center is crumbling, and black gets a good game. Back to the game. Back to 2015, d takes e4 played, take, bishop c5. And now a4, stopping black getting space with b5 on the queen side, but also a new idea coming up at the time. A new maneuver that I'd never seen before in the King's Indian attack. Castle, knight h4. This maneuver is typical. The knight can go to f5 because this pawn is not on e6. Now black can tuck the bishop back to g6, stopping the knight coming into f5. Black chose rook e8 first. Another typical maneuver from white is to play knight d2, then knight c4. When the white knight is on c4, it can pressurize black's central pawn. But Kramnik goes the other way. He plays knight a3. This is one reason I wanted to go through this game. You may be asking, what's the difference? Why not go knight d2 to c4? It's going to c4 anyway, but we will see very soon. Knight f8, planning to come to e6, controlling d4 and f4. Now, we could play a5, but maybe this pawn will be a target in the future. Knight c4, and how will white attack it? He's got the knight on c4, the queen on e1, but the bishop on c1 will come into play. Knight f8, bishop d2. A nice formation to remember in the King's Indian attack. If you go b6, well, the game has just begun. Maybe white will go bishop c3, maybe white can go knight f5. Controlling d4 first, the bishop on d2, it could go to c3, it could go to e3. Trying to get rid of black's really good bishop on c5. The game goes on. However, back to the game, knight f8 played, and here we go. A new idea at the time, b4. Here we have it. If there is a knight on d2, then b4 is not possible, because we need the queen on e1 to protect the b4 pawn. This was the first time I saw this possibility of a queenside expansion. The queen sits very well on e1. Bishop back, knight f5. One knight is on f5. The other knight can go to c4. White is playing on the king and the queen side. Knight e6. Knight is coming into d4, so one option is for white to play c3, just to control the d4 square. But what happens if you play c3? The queenside pawns are now targets. Black can actually strike with a5, breaking up white's structure. If you go b5, then the c5 square belongs to black. You can put a bishop there or a knight. White is losing control, and this is something Kramnik doesn't want to do, ever. Just don't lose control. c3 was not played in the game. Knight takes e7 check was. Getting the bishop pair. Queen takes e7 and now bishop e3. A great bishop is the one sitting on e3. This is why Kramnik got rid of black's dark squared bishop. To control squares, black cannot, because the bishop on e3 is controlling c5, it's targeting a7. It just sits perfectly on e3. Bishop g6 played by black, f3. Shutting it out, but so what? Another typical maneuvering idea coming up. The bishop on g2 is trapped, but white can in the future play h4, then bishop h3 to get this bishop in the game. Knight d7, knight c4, f5. Black goes for activity. One option was just to play f6 to play in a solid manner. But the point of f5 is to go f4. One drawback to this move is the e5 pawn is now weak, so if white can get another piece attacking it, then he's got a target. f5, rook d1, f4. Pause the video if you want to try and find the move Kramnik played. What did white play here to gain a big edge in this position? I will give you 5 seconds. White now crashed through with rook takes d7. The e5 pawn is weak and we can take advantage. Queen takes d7, knight takes e5, queen c7 and g takes f4. White has a knight and 2 pawns for the rook. White has a strong center and a strong knight on e5. I think it's a good deal. This material imbalance has worked out well for white. Knight takes f4 was played in the game, and after bishop takes f4, rook takes e5, just giving back the exchange. However, I want to look at c5 first. This position may be lost for black, but it gets a bit messy. The point of c5 is to gain some control. I played around with Stockfish and it said queen g3 was the best move, threatening f5, but I want to play a move just keeping some control for white, also leading to an advantage with b5. If knight d4, then rook f2, and the plan is just to kick this knight away. Bishop h5, c3, knight e6, and then rook c2. Just sidestepping because now the queen can go to g3. The bishop on g2 has a nice rerouting option. It can go to f1, then to c4. And white just maintains a lot of control in the position. Back to the game, g takes f4 played. Knight takes f4. Black decides to return the exchange straight away. He doesn't really want to get walked over because his rooks are just so bad in this type of middle game. Knight takes f4, bishop takes f4, rook takes e5 and queen e3, targeting a7. No rush to take the rook on e5 because it's still pinned. Queen e3 played and rook d8. First question, why not a5? Because in the game, MVL just gave up this pawn. a5, queen d4. Rook e8, and now taking on a5. Very similar to the game. Queen takes a5, no more pin, so let's take on e5, and then rook b1. And white has so much control. Really the dream position for a player of Kramnik's style. Queen on d4 is perfect. The rook on b1 has a target. Chances to improve the position with f4. Back to the game, rook d8 played, giving up the a7 pawn, and now queen e7. Getting out of the pin. Bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, queen back to e3. It looks like white has just won a pawn, but Vachier-Lagrave's idea is to get some activity with queen b2. Queen c5, great move, covering the b and the c pawn, and giving yourself the chance to advance your queenside majority. Queen c5, h6, and b5. A really clever move. After c takes b5, just pause the video if you want. It's a queen move, and I want you to play a double attack. I'll give you 5 seconds. The move is queen b6, attacking rook and bishop. In the game, rook d2 was played, giving up the bishop, but I want to look at queen d4 check, which may have been the best option. But I don't think Vachier-Lagrave wants to suffer in this ending, so he went for a dubious chance just to try something, because maybe he thought it was better than suffering in an endgame. Queen d4 check, let's see what happens. Take on b5, rook b4, and now rook d1. Black gets a pawn back, but after bishop f1, we have 4 versus 3, and white is just winning here. White can slowly improve the position. The king can sit well on e3. Get your pawns moving. This bishop, if it has the chance, can go to c4, and this rook can come in later into the position. Back to the game, rook d2 played, giving up the bishop, but after b takes a4, a dangerous looking pass pawn, white must act fast, and now it is time to use the bishop your opponent does not have. So let's play the typical maneuvering idea that was mentioned in the opening. Let's go h4. Bishop h3 coming soon. Queen d4 check, king h1, and queen d8 attacking h4, but Kramnik gives it up with bishop h3. Queen takes h4. You can't move the bishop, but that's okay, because he can move the queen and the rook. Queen e6 check played, king h8, and rook g1. Going for some checkmating ideas. Now, in the game, g5 was played, and the game ended very soon. What happens if rook d8? Queen g4, queen e7, just keeping them on, but then queen g6, and the black king is looking very weak, because this bishop can step into f5 very soon. Not straight away. For example, if a3, bishop f5, then queen h4 check is a huge problem, because if king g2, this rook can go to d2 and it'll be mate on f2. That's why after a3, you can play e5, a2, e6. If you play rook a8, it just doesn't work because of bishop f5. Queen h4 check, we see the vital difference. You can just go king g2, and the rook is no longer on d8 to give checkmate with rook d2. That's why in this position, it is over. You can't queen because it'll be checkmate on h7. The best option looks like to swap off queens, and then it will be lost. Take, rook a1, and that's it. Back to the game, rook g1, and g5 was played, giving white the chance to come in quickly and finish it off. Queen c8 check played, king g7, and one more move to finish it off. Let's get the rook in the game. It's no longer useful on the g file, so let's switch over to the b file. Rook b1, and that is game over. Rook takes b7 check is next. The queen can come back to c3 to give check, winning the rook on d2. Notice, on the previous move, this is not possible. Queen c3 check, because king g6, if you take the rook, then there is a nice perpetual drawing pattern to remember. Because after queen takes h3 check, even though white is up a rook, it will be a draw. Queen h2 check, queen g2, queen h5 check. Queen h2 check. If you go rook g2, then queen d1 check. And we have this pattern. You just keep alternating between d1 and h5, and there's no good way to block. If you go queen g1, queen h5 check, if you try the other way, it's the same thing. Queen h3, queen g2, you just go back, and we are back here again. Therefore, after rook b1, because of the two threats of rook takes b7 check and queen c3 check, MVL resigned. If you really enjoyed the video, consider making a small donation. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, why not give it a like and subscribe to the channel at the same time. Plus, hit that bell to get notified each time I release a new video. Thank you so much for watching.